I remember that night so clearly. The lights were soft, the smell of flowers and fried snacks lingered in the air, and my sister was laughing, her laugh, full and bright, filling the hall. Everyone was dressed in their best clothes, and I felt small somehow. Uncle James, my father's older brother, had always been a quiet man, not rude, but not easy to read either. That night, as I stood near the corner with my mom, he walked up, holding a glass of soda. He smiled at me, not the warm, familiar smile, but the kind that felt curious, almost probing. "Tell me," he said in that calm, slow tone, "that house you own, the one worth $1.5 million, how did you manage that?" I froze. My heart skipped. I could feel my parents stiffen behind me. Their smiles faltered, and a quiet tension filled the room, like someone had turned down the music without telling anyone. I could see my father's knuckles whitening as he held his plate, and my mother's hands shook slightly as she picked at a pastry. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to laugh it off, say something polite, anything to break the silence. But another part, the quiet, wary part, knew this question wasn't innocent. It carried weight, and that weight pressed down on me, making my palms sweaty, making my words stick in my throat. I looked at Uncle James, trying to smile, and all I could manage was, it's a long story." He raised an eyebrow, still calm, still quiet. "I like stories," he said, "but I also like honesty." That line, it stayed with me for hours, even after the party ended, even after my sister's laughter faded and the last guests left. Those words, simple, quiet, unassuming, echoed in my mind. Because that night wasn't just about a house, it was about family, secrets, pride, and the things we never say out loud. My family has always been complicated, not in a dramatic way, but in the quiet, everyday way that builds tension slowly without anyone noticing. My parents are loving but careful. My sister, she's golden, everyone's favorite, full of life and charm, and me, I've always felt a little invisible. We grew up in a modest home, in a quiet street lined with old oak trees. Our house was small, warm, and safe. My parents worked hard, my father in a local office, my mother running a small bakery from home. Money was always enough, but never extra, and yet, somehow, I always dreamed bigger. I was always the type to save, to plan, to imagine a future that didn't exist yet. I bought my first little home at 25, a small place that cost more than I thought I could ever afford. I painted every wall myself, planted flowers in the yard, and made it feel like it belonged to me. Later, through careful planning, some risks, and a bit of luck, I managed to upgrade to the $1.5 million house Uncle James had asked about. I never flaunted it. I never mentioned it casually. My parents didn't even know the exact number. They trusted me to manage my life, and I trusted them not to question me. We never talked about money openly, always politely avoiding it at the dinner table. So when Uncle James asked, it wasn't just a question. It was a crack in the wall I had carefully built around my life. My parents' silence, I could feel it like a wave crashing against me. Not surprise exactly, but something heavier. Fear? Shame? Pride? I couldn't tell. The engagement party itself was beautiful. My sister, glowing in her peach-colored dress, smiled at everyone and laughed with her friends. My niece and nephew ran around in tiny suits and dresses, sticky with candy and laughter. My parents floated through the crowd, smiling politely, nodding, trying to keep everything calm. But after Uncle James's question, something changed. During dinner, the conversation shifted. My father became quiet, speaking only in short sentences. My mother tried to change topics, asking about cousins, about the caterers, about the music. But Uncle James, he didn't push, not really. He just sat back, calm, watching. I could feel the weight of his eyes on me, the kind of look that makes you want to disappear and explain everything at the same time. I thought about leaving, about stepping out, about saying something before it got worse. But my sister's eyes found mine across the room, worried, and I stayed. We all stayed. That night, the first seed of tension grew quietly, invisible to everyone else, but to me, to my parents, it was a storm, one that would change everything, in ways I couldn't yet see. The days after the engagement party felt strange, not in a dramatic way, but in the quiet, unsettling way that makes you notice every little look, every half-said word. My parents were different. They weren't angry, not exactly, but they seemed tense. I could see it in the kitchen when my mom poured tea with trembling hands, in the living room when my father's smile felt forced. I tried to bring it up gently. "Mom, Dad, is everything okay?" They exchanged glances, and my mother said softly, "Everything's fine, dear, just a lot of things to think about." But it wasn't fine. I could feel it, and I didn't know how to fix it. The next family gathering, my sister's fiancé came over with his parents. Uncle James wasn't here this time, but the weight of his questions still lingered like smoke in the air. My parents spoke less than usual, and every compliment or question from guests felt like it carried a hidden meaning. I realized then how much family expectations can quietly weigh on someone, how a simple question about money can make people retreat into themselves, make them measure every word, every glance. One evening, as I helped my mom in the kitchen, she paused, wiping her hands on a towel. "Do you think maybe you shouldn't talk about that house so openly?" she asked, voice low, almost trembling. I froze. I don't talk about it, Mom. You know that." She looked away. "It's not just about talking. It's complicated. People notice. People compare." I nodded slowly. I understood her fear, even if I didn't fully agree. But her worry planted a seed in my mind. I started noticing small things at gatherings, the way distant relatives asked about my career, the way cousins whispered when they thought I wasn't listening, the way Uncle James's question lingered in the corners of the house like an uninvited guest. At my sister's engagement dinner, the tension became more visible. The table was full of laughter and clinking glasses, but I could see the subtle lines in my parents' faces. My father, usually talkative and joking, spoke in short, careful sentences. My mother nodded politely, but I caught the quick sigh she tried to hide. Uncle James wasn't present, but his influence was everywhere. His question had become a silent shadow, reminding everyone that appearances, wealth, and family pride mattered more than simple happiness. That night, after the guests left, I walked to the balcony to breathe. The city lights stretched endlessly, but they didn't bring comfort. My sister came out quietly and leaned on the railing beside me. "You've been quiet all evening," she said softly. "I guess I'm just thinking," I replied. She nodded. "Family, it's complicated, isn't it?" I smiled faintly. "You have no idea." The next week, small conflicts started appearing. Nothing major, just little tensions that felt like splinters under the skin. A cousin asked about my career path with a tone that implied judgment. My parents whispered to each other about money management. Even my sister, usually warm and carefree, seemed distracted, her laughter less frequent. One evening, my father called me aside. "You know, it's not wrong to be successful, but sometimes success, it can make people uneasy." "I know, Dad," I said, careful not to sound defensive. "I never try to show off, I just live my life." He nodded, but the worry in his eyes lingered, and I realized something. The problem wasn't me. The problem was the way people reacted to me, to the choices I had made quietly, without fanfare. I started noticing more subtle moments. At family dinners, plates were passed with careful distance. Compliments were measured, almost reluctant. Conversations avoided certain topics, and when someone did mention money, my parents would quickly change the subject. One afternoon, I overheard my aunt talking to my mother in the living room. "It's just, People don't like feeling small, she said quietly. Even family. My mother didn't answer immediately. Then she whispered something I couldn't hear fully, but I understood the meaning. My success had created a divide, unspoken but real, and it was starting to fracture the calm facade we all tried to maintain. At work, I tried to distract myself, but the tension followed me. My mind replayed Uncle James's words constantly. I like honesty. Those words, they were simple, but they carried judgment, and suddenly I felt like I was balancing on a thin line between pride and shame, between family love and family expectations. I began to notice small, passive remarks from others. Must be nice having your own place. Oh, she's done well for herself, hasn't she? Some people just have a way of getting ahead, don't they? Each comment was soft, almost casual, but together they formed a quiet chorus of scrutiny. And my parents, usually my shield, seemed almost trapped themselves, unsure of what to say, unsure of how to protect me without causing more tension. It all came to a head during another family gathering. My sister's fiancé made an innocent joke about keeping up appearances, and suddenly the room stiffened. My father muttered something under his breath, my mother looked away, and for a moment I felt the weight of every unspoken word in the room pressing down on me. Later, alone in my room, I thought about everything: the parties, the questions, the whispers. I realized that what I had built quietly with hard work and patience wasn't just mine. It had become a mirror reflecting insecurities, judgments, and unspoken fears within my family. And in that quiet reflection, I felt something I hadn't expected: sadness. Not anger, not resentment, just a deep, gentle sadness for how fragile relationships can be, even when love is present. And I also realized something else. I couldn't control how others felt or what they thought. I could only control my actions, my words, and the honesty with which I lived my life. And maybe, I thought, that was enough. But life has a way of testing even that. The following week, my father asked me to join him for a drive. The sun was low, casting long shadows over the streets. He didn't speak immediately. He just drove, quiet, letting the city blur past the windows. Finally, he said softly, almost hesitant, "You need to be careful. People, sometimes, they don't see what you see. They only see what they think they deserve." I nodded, unsure what to say. His words weren't a warning exactly. They were a plea, a quiet hope that I would navigate the subtle tensions without breaking anything that mattered. And that's when I understood the rising storm. It wasn't loud, it didn't shout, it crept slowly, in small looks, half-spoken sentences, and quiet judgments. But it was there, real and undeniable, and I knew that sooner or later it would demand attention. The tension that had been quietly building for weeks finally reached its peak at my sister's engagement photo shoot. My parents insisted on being there, my sister insisted on everything being perfect, and I insisted on staying calm, even when every glance reminded me of Uncle James's question. It was a sunny afternoon, the garden perfectly manicured, flowers in full bloom, cameras flashing. Everyone was smiling, laughing, adjusting dresses and bow ties. On the outside, it was perfect, but I could feel the storm inside the house, inside my family, inside myself. And then it happened. My uncle, Uncle James, walked into the garden unexpectedly. He had called last minute saying he wanted to see the photographer's setup. I wasn't ready. Nobody was ready. And yet he came with his calm, measured steps, his eyes scanning everything and everyone, landing on me with that same quiet intensity. He smiled politely. "Beautiful setup," he said. "Everything looks just right." I nodded, forcing a smile. "Thank you, Uncle James." He turned to my parents, and for a moment, everything slowed. My mother's hand tightened around my father's arm, my father's jaw clenched. I could almost hear the unspoken thought, "Here it comes." Then Uncle James asked the question again, the same question that had haunted the engagement party. but this time it was sharper, pointed, impossible to ignore. "So, about the house," he said, calm, measured. "The $1.5 million house you own. How exactly did that happen?" The garden seemed to grow colder. The flowers seemed less vibrant. My sister froze mid-laugh. Guests glanced between us, sensing the tension. My parents' smiles disappeared entirely. My father's hand trembled slightly as he held a glass of water. My mother looked as if she might step back and disappear entirely into the bushes. I opened my mouth, ready to answer, ready to explain, but words failed me. I wanted to say, "It's hard work, patience, and a bit of luck." I wanted to say, "It's nothing to do with anyone else here." But before I could speak, Uncle James continued, "I mean, it's not small, that house. It's a lot of money. People notice these things. I just wonder, did your parents help, or was it something else?" The words hit like stones in my chest. Something else. I knew exactly what he was implying, that I had somehow taken advantage or gotten ahead in a way my family couldn't see, a way that made them, my parents, look smaller, weaker, less capable. My father's face went pale, my mother's lips pressed together tightly, her eyes refusing to meet his. And my sister, she looked at me, eyes wide, almost afraid. "It's my own work," I said finally, my voice trembling slightly but calm enough to hide the panic. "I saved. I invested carefully. It's nothing dishonest." Uncle James's gaze didn't waver. "I see," he said softly. "Just honesty matters. People notice, you know." And then the quiet betrayal hit. From behind, my cousin, someone I had always trusted, laughed softly. "Honestly, some of us wondered if you really earned it," she said casually, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I mean, a house like that, at your age, it makes people think." The words were gentle in tone, but like a dagger in impact. Gasps rippled across the garden. My sister's fiancé froze. My parents, they went completely silent. Not a word, not a glance, just heavy, suffocating silence. I felt my stomach twist. My hands went cold. I wanted to defend myself, to yell, to cry, to leave. But I didn't. I stayed. Because this wasn't just about me. It was about family. It was about pride and love, and the fragile way relationships can crack under scrutiny. My mother finally spoke, voice barely above a whisper. "That's enough." But the words felt hollow. The damage had already been done. Conversations faltered, laughter died, guests began whispering, looking at me with that same quiet curiosity, that same invisible judgment. I excused myself, walking toward the side garden. The air was warm, but my chest felt tight. I leaned against a tree, trying to breathe, trying to calm the storm that had erupted inside me. My sister came quietly, placing a hand on my shoulder. "I'm so sorry," she said, her voice breaking slightly. I didn't know they would say that." "It's not your fault," I said, trying to steady my voice. It's family." But even as I said it, I realized something important. Family doesn't always protect you from the world. Sometimes family reflects it. Sometimes family is where the quietest betrayals happen. Later, my father found me in the garden. His eyes were wet, not with anger, but with something else. Sadness, regret, maybe even shame. "I didn't expect this," he said quietly. I thought they would understand." "They will," I whispered, "in time, but right now it's a lot." That night I couldn't sleep. I thought about everything, the parties, the questions, the whispers, the judgments. I thought about Uncle James's calm, probing eyes and my cousin's careless words, and I realized with a painful clarity that nothing I had built, no success, no careful planning, no quiet patience, could protect me from people's assumptions, not even my family's. The turning point wasn't just that they questioned me, it was that I saw, clearly, that love alone doesn't prevent hurt, care alone doesn't prevent judgment, and pride can be fragile, even in the most loving households. Over the next few days, the tension didn't ease. My parents avoided talking about the party. My sister called, apologizing again and again. I sat alone in the quiet of my home, replaying every moment, every word, every glance. and then I made a choice. I decided I wouldn't let anger or shame or judgment define me. I would respond, not with retaliation, not with bitterness, but with clarity, honesty, and calm. I would show my family, slowly, carefully, that my life was mine to live, that success was not a weapon, and that love could survive judgment if we let it. But the path forward wouldn't be simple. The turning point had shifted everything. Every smile, every glance, every conversation carried a new weight, and I knew that the next steps, how I responded, how I protected my family and myself, would determine not just the story of that $1.5 million house, but the story of my family, my relationships, and my own heart. The days after the garden incident were quiet, almost painfully so. The party had ended, the photos were taken, and the guests had left, but the tension lingered like a shadow over my family. My parents spoke less, avoiding any direct mention of the house or Uncle James's question. My sister seemed busier than ever with engagement preparations, yet I could see her worry in the small ways, how she would pause mid-conversation to glance at me, how her smile sometimes faltered when she thought no one was watching. I realized then that resolution wouldn't come from ignoring what happened. It would come from understanding and patience. I needed to bridge the distance between them and me, not with arguments or explanations, but with quiet honesty. One evening, I invited my parents over for tea at my house. The sun was low, casting long golden shadows across the living room. My mother brought homemade cookies, and my father carried a small box of pastries from the bakery he still worked at. There was a softness to the moment, but also a tension that refused to leave. I wanted to talk, I said gently, placing the teacups on the table. My father nodded, silent. My mother sat beside him, hands folded neatly on her lap. I know the last few weeks have been strange, and I know Uncle James's question, the party, all of it, it put a lot of pressure on you. My mother's eyes glistened slightly. We didn't know how to handle it, she admitted quietly. We didn't want to make things worse, and we were scared people would think things about us, about how you got where you are. I reached out and held her hand. Mom, Dad, I've worked for this. Every step, every decision, it was mine. I never asked for your money. I never wanted to make anyone feel small. I just wanted to live my life honestly. My father sighed, the tension in his shoulders softening slightly. We know that. It's just sometimes we forget. Sometimes pride, it makes us silent when we should speak. We sat in silence for a while, sipping tea, listening to the quiet hum of the neighborhood outside. I realized that sometimes resolution isn't about big gestures or dramatic conversations. It's about small, honest words, about letting people see the truth calmly, without blame. Later that week, my sister and I had a long walk in the park near our childhood home. The air was crisp, leaves rustling underfoot. She spoke softly, almost hesitantly. I was so worried about what Uncle James and everyone else would think. I didn't want you to feel attacked. I didn't want our family to drift apart. I smiled gently. I know, and thank you for standing by me in your own way. I felt it, even when words weren't said. She laughed softly, a little self-conscious. You've always been quiet, careful, but strong. I guess I'm realizing now that strength isn't about proving anything to anyone. It's about living honestly, like you do. Her words struck me. That was exactly it. The house, the money, the assumptions, they were never truly about what I owned. They were about perception, about pride, about the quiet judgments people carry. And by staying true to myself, calmly, patiently, I had weathered the storm. Over the next few weeks, small changes began to appear. My parents started speaking more openly at family dinners, sharing memories, stories. little details of their lives that had been hidden under layers of silence. My sister laughed more freely again, and even my cousins began to ask about my work in a curious, non-judgmental way. One evening, my father invited Uncle James over for a quiet dinner. I wasn't present for the conversation, but later my father explained. "He apologized," my father said softly. "Not with grand words, just quietly. He admitted he should have been more careful with his questions. And I realized, even people with the best intentions can hurt, sometimes without meaning to." I nodded. That moment, small and calm, felt heavier than any argument or confrontation. Forgiveness, when given quietly and without fanfare, carries more weight than anything else. I also learned to forgive myself. For weeks, I had carried a sense of guilt, wondering if I had somehow caused the tension. But I realized that honesty and patience are stronger than silent judgment. I hadn't done anything wrong. I had simply lived my life. Months passed, and the engagement was celebrated with more ease and warmth. The garden, once the scene of tension, became a place of laughter again. My parents smiled more freely, my sister's fiancé was relaxed, and even the quietest relatives seemed to sense the shift in energy. During that time, I also had private conversations with some family members who had made subtle judgments. I didn't argue, I didn't explain in detail, I simply shared my story calmly, the hard work, the small risks, the quiet patience. And gradually they began to understand, not just about the house, but about me. I realized something profound. Resolution isn't about making everyone agree with you. It's about being true to yourself, showing honesty through calm actions, and allowing time and patience to do the rest. The family didn't suddenly change overnight, but the tension faded. It was replaced with a quiet respect, a subtle understanding that what I had built was my own, and that my intentions were pure. The most important lesson came not from words, but from observation. I watched my parents, their shoulders relaxing, their smiles returning. I watched my sister, her laughter full and bright again. I watched Uncle James, finally letting go of his silent scrutiny, engaging in conversations without probing, without judgment. And I realized that calm strength, honesty, patience, and quiet resilience can heal more than arguments ever could. It can mend fractures in relationships, soothe insecurities, and allow love to persist, even in the face of subtle betrayal and misunderstanding. The weeks turned into months, and life gradually returned to a gentle rhythm. The house, the engagement, the whispered judgments, they no longer held the weight they once did. What remained was clarity, calm, and a deeper connection with my family. One evening, I sat in the living room with my parents, the soft hum of the city outside our windows. My father poured tea, my mother brought a plate of warm cookies. There was laughter again, quiet but genuine, filling the corners of the room. "I think we all learned something," my father said thoughtfully, "about honesty, about pride, and about how we see each other." My mother nodded. "It's not just about the house, it's about understanding and patience and love." I smiled softly. "Yes, it's about love, even when things are difficult, even when words are said that hurt or questions are asked that challenge us. Love can survive, quietly, if we let it." My sister called from the kitchen, laughing with her fiancé as they discussed engagement plans. I listened, feeling a warmth I hadn't realized I was missing. The house, the money, the misunderstandings, they were all background now. What mattered was family, connection, and the quiet strength to stand by your values and your heart. I thought back to Uncle James and his calm, probing question that had started all this tension. I realized it wasn't truly about the house or the money. It was about perception, about assumptions, about how easy it is to question someone quietly without understanding their journey. And in a way, that question had given me a gift. It had forced me to reflect, to communicate honestly, and to find calm within the storm. The next day, I walked through the garden of my house, sunlight spilling over the flowers I had planted years ago. The roses were in bloom, the oak tree casting its familiar shadow. I breathed deeply, appreciating the quiet, simple beauty of the moment. Life, I realized, is much like this garden. There will be storms, shadows, and unexpected questions. There will be people who judge, who misunderstand, who speak words that cut quietly. But with patience, honesty, and calm, the garden continues to grow. The flowers bloom again, the sun rises, and life moves forward. I looked around my home, feeling a gentle pride, not in the house itself, but in the life I had built with care, and the relationships I had preserved through honesty and quiet strength. I realized that success without love and understanding means very little, and love without patience and resilience can be fragile, but together they create a balance that is unshakable. As evening fell, I sat by the window watching the city lights flicker. My parents' laughter drifted up from the kitchen, my sister's joy echoed from the garden. I felt peace, calm, and a quiet certainty. Sometimes life tests us with subtle storms. Sometimes the questions aren't easy, the judgments aren't fair, but the way we respond, calmly, honestly, and patiently, can turn those storms into lessons, and those lessons into deeper understanding. I smiled softly to myself. The house, the family, the misunderstandings, they were all part of a story about patience, about love, and about standing quietly strong when the world, or even your own family, questions your journey. And in that calm, quiet moment, I knew one thing: life moves forward, hearts heal, and love, true love, gentle and patient, endures.